7 turn right, heading 185, reduce speed 180 knots.
185 on the heading, 180 on the takeoff air 007.
Speedbird 124, reduce speed 160 knots to 40 me.
Reduce 160 to 4, speed 124.
Hi there guys, Matt here, hope you're all well, and welcome back to another XP11 video. It's been quite a while. A lot has happened in my life over the, for the last 2 years I reckon, but more specifically over the last couple of months. In the real world, I've actually started to learn to fly. Now, if you've been following my progress from the very beginning, then you will know that I was basically super morbidly obese. I got to 550 odd pounds, which is like 250 odd kilos. Was unable to fly. I used to fly when I was younger, but that was sort of 10 plus years ago. I couldn't get a medical, or actually technically got the medical, then lost the medical, and then due to the overweight, or obesity, not overweight issues, that's technically not correct, but due to the obesity, I couldn't fly. Anyway, cut forward to 2019, and now 300 pounds, convert that to kilos lighter, and I recently got my medical again, and I have started to learn to fly. Now, I'm learning to fly at a place in Liverpool called Merseyflight, which in this scenery is actually denoted even, in this very low-res porter cabin, which is basically how it's laid out here in real life. You've got Lomac at the end, which I'm pretty sure they've either shut down or just don't operate anymore. Then you've got Merseyflight here, and then I have no idea what's around this corner, apart from the fact that there was a bunch of Raven Air signs, but there is, I don't know if you can see it on the scenery, there is a security gate right here. It's not modelled, so when I park my car, I just park it here. You can't actually get through there without, I guess, a pass, or maybe you have to buzz in or something. Anyway, I digress. So I started to learn to fly, and I started to learn to fly in a Piper Cherokee, a PA28, the 140 is the one I fly. Registration is Golf Alpha Sierra Whiskey, so G-ASSW, very fitting. And I've logged a few hours, probably been in the air more than the hours that I've logged, but the first couple were just kind of seeing if it was for me and seeing if I could operate the plane comfortably, having lost the weight, etc., and that's all good. So I figured that what I would do is I really want to make some real life flying content. That is the goal, and I've been going about my business and purchasing some equipment to allow me to do that. But there's a couple of problems. Number one is, and this is not me complaining, this is just the way it is, and you have to respect the system. Some instructors don't like you recording. Period. They hate the fact that you are messing around with the camera, and it's not it's not the fact that they're on camera. They don't usually care about that. It's the fact that it takes away the attention from actually learning how to fly and operating the aircraft. And the other problem I have is, for some reason, I have an adapter for the ATC audio that only seems to work on one of the two Cherokees, and I don't know why. So I may have to look into that. But the biggest problem is instructors not wanting it to be recorded. Some of them are fantastic, and I try my best to book with those. But it is what it is at the end of the day. If you fly in real life, you'll understand that, safety and attention span has to be in favor of you and the operation of the aircraft more than grabbing some footage for a YouTube video. So, in absence of real flying videos, I kind of want to do a little bit of simming in X-Plane in this, which is the V-Flight Air Cherokee 140. Now, they have a bunch of Pipers in their catalogue, and to all intents and purposes, they're actually pretty damn good. So, for the times that I can't actually record the flight in real life, I figured I would do exactly the same exercise, but in the sim. and more specifically an X-plane, and more specifically using this, which is a V-Flight Cherokee. I almost said Cessna then, Cherokee 140. Pretty much identical to the counterpart. I really can't spot much of a difference, and as we learn to, or not learn, but as we start it up and take it for a spin, I'll kind of point out some of the differences. What I have learned as well is I fly in two Cherokees, one of the primary one versus the one I fly less regularly. They are essentially the same engine. They're essentially the same plane from a sort of spec insurance standpoint. Some of them have different avionics in them. Some of them have different navigation suites in. I think one of them is IFR certified. Maybe the other one isn't. Don't hold me to that. Because I don't actually think one has... Maybe one has an autopilot. I don't know. I don't use autopilot yet. So, but this rendition, this V-Flight Air, is very, very similar. Mixed in with X-Plane and the way X-Plane does low-level flying, especially with the True Earth stuff that's just come out from Orbex, and especially with Active Sky. I can't reproduce this in P3D. It's incomparable. It's just insane how good it is. I did try to get Track IR working because I think that would be the kind of icing on the cake. Instead of having to use the mouse to just kind of move around, people get a bit motion sick with it. I tried, and I'm still trying, but I really wanted to get a video recorded, and messing around with with Track IR is something that I just don't have the time for right now. So we'll try for another episode. If people enjoy watching it, I guess that's, it's a balancing act. As much as I enjoy making videos of all types, this for me is all well, it's not really a numbers game, but if people just aren't watching this sort of content, then why would I bother producing it? It doesn't make sense. So hopefully you enjoy it, and hopefully there'll be a lot more of where it came from, and of course it should integrate very well with the real life stuff as well. So, plan of action for today. Well, I'm not a fancy video editor, but what I'm going to try and do is kind of zoom away from the aircraft. Here we go. So, here we are at Liverpool, and this is with True Earth GB. This is the central one. I do have ortho, so ortho for XP for everywhere else, but I mean, this is blended well and a higher rendition and all of that rubbish. Well, not rubbish, actually, it's quite fantastic. So I decided to use this. So the plan of action is to depart from runway 27, which is this runway here, heading to the west, and then we're going to turn right. And this is the exact exercise that I did about 4 days ago. And we're going to fly up across the city of Liverpool, which is kind of, you can see the area here, up to a place called Seaforth, which is an exiting point. There's a dockyard and stuff like that. And that's they call it a visual reference point. It's an exiting point for the control zone. There's 4 or 5 of them at Liverpool. And then we turned left and we flew down the kind of North Wales coast, down to sort of real Llandudno area, did some steep turns, etc., etc. And then we flew back down the coast, and we then came inland, followed a motorway, joined by a place called Kirby, which is so hard for me to see on this scenery. I think that's Kirby up there. Routed in towards the airfield to land on runway 27, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable flight. It took about an hour and 20 minutes to do. I was scheduled to fly for 4 hours, but the weather was, let's just say it was bumpy, very bumpy. When we took off, the surface wind was from a direct headwind of about 12 knots. By the time we came back around to land, it had swung to sort of 300 degrees, and it was probably about 18, gust 25, something like that. So we decided to just call it a day. But either way, it was super good fun. I had a great instructor. I kind of swapped between 3 or 4 of them. But this guy was super cool. Let me do all the flying, etc., etc. And I'll show you some of the things which I found challenging in the Cherokee versus when I used to fly a Cessna 172 back in the day. Or maybe my memory is just not as good. We'll see. So, anyway, here we are at the GA apron, and I've got everything set as far as fuel and stuff like that goes, to be honest. We were the first flight out of the day, so we had a fueler come round, and he was just like, yo, you want full fuel? And I'm pretty sure we just whacked full fuel in, or maybe like 3/4 tank. It was being used all day for 3 or 4 different lessons, so I guess they just fuel it once in the morning and then get on with it. So when you come out to the aircraft, or when I came out to the aircraft, the instructor had already done the walk around, and I guess the walk around in a Cherokee is something I've actually not covered yet. I have a little booklet on what we're supposed to do, and I don't know why we didn't do it. I guess that's one of the things I'm yet to do. So I'm not going to do any crazy walk around stuff because I'll just cock it up and probably say the wrong things. There was no chocks on the aircraft. There was no coverings. The door was open, obviously, can't get in. There was no lights on. Everything was basically just a cold and dark state with an open cockpit or open flight deck for us to get in. So, with that in mind, we shall jump inside. Now, the first thing to do is to... let me just remove the ground elements. And I'll show you this thing. So this thing is the way you control all of this. It's supposed to be a knee board. I mean, if you actually look, it's got the... This is basically the same knee board as I've got. It's like a Velcro strap that you would put around your leg, and then that's the way it's supposed to work. But this is where you do all the fuel and the payload and stuff like that. You can add people into the front. And then this is some of the settings. Now, we're not flying IFR, so I don't really care about the GPS panel, so we're just going to use a VFR one. You just saw me turn off the ground elements. That's just the chock stuff on the outside. Internal glass, I guess that's probably like reflective stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can see if I just click in the corner here, it kind of changes a little bit. Hide co-pilot and internal view. Well, suppose you could. Makes no difference to me. Nose gear steers. Now, this is a big one. In the real life, this should be unchecked. Honestly, the Cherokee I fly is... I use the term a bag of rice quite often when I fly payware aircraft in Flight Sim, and the real life counterpart is also a bag of rice. It has no toe brakes, and it has no way to control the nose gear, so it always... so you always have this problem with when you try to pull away, unless you use differential braking, and the handbrake, sorry, not differential braking, that doesn't make sense if it doesn't have any toe brakes. You have to use the rudder pedals and the handbrake, i.e. this thing right there, and you literally just pull it to wherever you need to steer the aircraft. It is the most dysfunctional way of taxiing a plane, and honestly, like, that I can't wait to just get out of this and do, you know, even the Tomahawk has differential toe brakes. And actually, this one has them modeled. If I release the parking brake and then move my toe brakes, oh, there we go. You can see the actual pedals move and the brakes on them move as well. But the one I fly has this sort of rudder pedal setup on this side as well. So there's just no toe brakes, period. So what we'll do is we'll close the door. The latching mechanism on this is a bit weird, so you have to close the handle, and then you have to look up here, and there's a close open thing, so you have to... I actually don't know if that is... I feel like maybe it does it automatically. Now if I click that, will open? Oh, I have no idea. It should really be in that position, though. So it's a two-way latch, essentially. And then once you're inside, it's relatively roomy, to be fair. I mean, I'm a pretty big guy, and me and almost called him a constructor then. Me and the instructor fit in quite well. It's pretty comfortable. You're touching shoulders a little bit. It's really not that bad. Everything else is basically in the same place. You have this funky-looking yoke, which is not what you would expect. Push to talk from me is there on this one, but actually on the one I fly, it's like, if we were to show you in 3D terms, it's like right there on the back of the yoke. But does that really make a difference? Not really. For some reason, the instructor's push to talk is actually in the right place. So maybe they just broke mine and just replaced it. I don't know. Everything else, avionics master switch is technically always on, because apparently someone broke it, and so instead of repairing it and making a new one, it's just hidden out the way, and it's always switched on, so I don't have to bother with avionics master. So I'm just going to switch it on and just leave it there, and we'll just pretend that it's always on. Everything else, though, is exactly where we need it to be. Fuel, Selector valve is in the right place. Instrument lights, strobe lights, pitot, fuel pump, nav lights, landing lights, beacon light. Actually, one of them has a beacon, the other one doesn't. Again, does it really matter? Oh, actually, no. Wait. One of them has a beacon. They both have beacons. One of them has a strobe, the other one doesn't. Okay, yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure it's illegal not to have a beacon light. Okay, so, anyway. So to start it up is relatively straightforward. I'm going to run off a checklist that I found on Google because I don't want to mess things up. So I'm just going to go to the engine start checklist and just make sure everything is good to go. So for the engine start checklist, the first thing it calls for is the master switch to go on. And you can hear all the electrics sort of kick in. Then of course the beacon light, and if you want the nav light. And then from there, the mixture, which is over here, should be full rich. The fuel pump needs to come on, which is this here, and you'll see as you turn it on, the fuel pressure increases. And then you basically just want to make sure that that it goes into the green, and if it doesn't, then obviously your fuel pump's knackered. Carb heat should be off, which is exactly where it is. It's all the way in. And the primer, which is over here, it depends really. I mean, both times I've used it numerous times to different effects, so I'll just give it 3 pumps for now. The throttle needs to be open just a little bit to start it, about a quarter of its total travel. And then we want to open the window, and you yell as loud as you can physically yell, clear prop. Turn the mags to both, and then holding the brakes, because the brakes on this thing are super unreliable. Push the starter. And there you go. I just plugged the headphones in because it gets super loud. I'm also going to turn the master volume down as well. Okay, now the aircraft, or the engine started, everything will start to rise into the green. You might have to give it a bit. You want to set 1,000 RPM, which is about there. And the fuel pump can go back off, and we'll shut the window. There we go, now it's less loud. The instrument lights on if you really care. So, that is basically everything started. I've not yet encountered a problem where... Actually, no. The second time I flew, I had to press the starter twice. We just had to have a bit more primer. That was it. But yeah, as far as starting up an engine goes, it's really not that bad. It's very little effort is required. Okay, so at this point, we would probably be tuning in the... Actually, it's funny, isn't it? I already have the tower tuned in, 126355, but we would be tuning the ATIS, getting the weather, and for the sake of this video, I already checked that the surface wind is 350 degrees 6 knots. It's cav OK, QNH 1032. I wish there was a way to change the pressure to hectopascal, but it's in inches of mercury. But the transition, or the conversion, is what, 3047-ish, 3046. We'll go with 3047. Okay, there we go. Squawk code again would be given by ATC, but for what we're doing, they give us 5010, and that's basically it. It's time to disappear over to the run-up area. Now, there is a few things in the checklist which I have just spotted, which I've never done before, and maybe it's because it's in the UK, but the taxi checklist has a thing that says mixture lean for taxi. We have never touched the mixture during taxi. Maybe that's just an American thing, I don't know. But either way, we will leave it as it is, and we will taxi over to the run-up area. Now, to be honest, with 1,000 RPM, usually this thing just wants to go by itself. It doesn't really need much input. And at this point, as we're taxiing to the run-up area, it is quite literally a case of just making sure all your controls are working, which there is absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be. And the correct way is to actually look at the wing and make sure the control surfaces are moving. If you want to put all the flaps down and check them, I mean, again, this would have probably been done on the walk around, but I haven't actually got around to that just yet. So the run-up area at Liverpool, I don't really know if there's a designated one. We just kind of all taxi towards the same area and point it into the wind, and then just go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spin it around, and I'm going to face the outward taxiway, or the taxiway that we're going to exit via, and then we'll stick the parking brake on and we'll start doing all the power related stuff. Should probably put like a huge disclaimer in this video saying please do not use this for educational purposes, otherwise you'll probably crash. Right, that was very harsh braking, but again, X-plane physics for you. Okay, so parking brake set, and we are good. So first things first, landing lights. We can make sure they're off, which they are. Parking brake was set. Flight instruments. Okay, so we have pressure set. We need to line up the heading indicator. Right now it's saying we're a heading of 315 degrees. We are definitely not at 315 degrees. We're about 175. So if you push it in this, it actually lines it up for you, but the way to do it as well is you can kind of scroll on the outside. So that's set. After that is mixture, which is already full rich. If you were leaning for ground ups, I guess that's why you need to redo that. Okay, so as far as the power checks go, throttle can come up to 2000 RPM. Hold the brakes, otherwise you will end up over there somewhere. So 2000 RPM. And by this point, on both times, I've witnessed that the T's and P's for the engine is now completely within range, and we're good to fly. So now it's just a case of checking the mags. So we'll check the left one first, and you see it drops a little bit, but I mean, they say it shouldn't drop for more than 175 RPM, and there should be no more of a difference between 50 between the two. So I mean, that's only dropped by 100, if that. Go back to both, you'll see it build back up, and then once it's stable you can go back to the right one, and again same thing. And then we can also check the vacuum, make sure the vacuum has between 4.9 and 5.1, which well, I mean, there's the green band, so we're not going to be that pedantic about that. As long as there's suction and it's within the green band, then we're good. We can bring the carb heat out even. When I do that, my RPM always tanks in the real one. Doesn't seem to do that here. Don't know why. It does a little bit. Don't know, maybe this has just got a more efficient engine. I think the one that I am flying in is probably on its way out, but there you go. And that's that. So we can basically idle the throttle with the carb heat. Just make sure that it doesn't die on us. Give it 10 seconds or so. And then put the throttle back to 1000. And then we can just put the carb heat back in. And that's basically it. As far as the engine stuff goes, we can check we've got trim for takeoff, which is, I mean, it depends which plane you fly, but a little bit of up trim usually goes quite well for me. Maybe it's because I'm just so fat, I don't know. From that, we can put the fuel pump back on. That's fine. It's such an annoying noise, but once you pass 1,000 feet, then you're good. We can turn on the transponder too, so I'll just throw that on. And make sure everyone's strapped in. If you needed any flaps, now's probably a good time to do it. But we don't. So away we go. Bit of power, and we're going to head to runway 27. Now we don't use a full length because there's absolutely zero need to do that. So we're just going to go to Golf, which is right there. It takes all of about 10 seconds to get to. You actually spend longer holding at Liverpool than you do taxiing. Because well, actually, probably not if you're on 09, which is the other end. But I've not actually used that runway yet, so. And then as we turn on the taxiway, you should see this turn 2, the good old turn coordinator, which is saying that it is 100% working. And then as we turn this corner too, we're good. Perfect. Alright. So, we'll just assume that we've got ATC, we're clear to take off. Put all the lights on, pitot heat on. Again, it really does depend on what the weather's doing. You wouldn't really need it on a day like today. It's fine, but I don't know. I have OCD with switches. I like them to all be on. And we can line up on runway 27. And no sooner that we're on the runway, have a quick glance at your watch. Make sure you know you're off time, because otherwise you get billed for time that you don't need to get billed for. And the power comes in, and it's just full power. And down the runway we go. Now, you want to bring it back at about sort of 65, 70. The outside is miles per hour, and the inside is knots. And it'll just fly itself. You really don't need to do much in the way of manhandling it. And then you climb about sort of 80, 85. And then we're just going to let it go up and up and up. And then at 500 feet, that's usually when it's safe to start turning and whatever else you need to do. But we're going to be departing out to the north, so we're actually going to wait a little bit and then kind of follow the coastline round. And as long as we stay below 1,500 feet, we will not infringe anybody or anything. And so there's 1,000 feet now. We want to turn off the fuel pump. Finally get rid of that stupid noise. And we'll trim it a little bit. I mean, honestly, it really doesn't need much doing to it. It just flies itself. And we'll climb to probably 1,400 feet, give or take. And then we'll just level it off there and bring the power back to about 2,200 RPM, give or take. There it is, 21, 22. And that is, to all intents and purposes, level flight. And that's how it usually stays for a very long time. The problem is with the airspace around Liverpool. I mean, you could go higher, but you'd have to coordinate that with the approach radar service. And I think maybe students that are this early into learning to fly probably they probably stay away from any of that stuff. But as far as the scenery goes, it's an awesome routing for sightseeing. I mean, there's a Radio City Tower. You'll have, I don't know if they model the docks or anything like that with the Orbeck scenery. I'd imagine they do. There's a cathedral. I just saw that there. Yep, there's a cathedral. Oh wait, what? Am I going crazy? Why do I think that's a cathedral? There's my geography of Liverpool out the window. But either way, it's really nice heading up this way. Now at this point, we'd still be under Liverpool Tower. And between now and probably the overhead of the city, they switch us to approach. And it's funny actually. At this point, we were having a chat, me and my instructor, and we said, you know, if we had an engine failure right now, in terms of where the hell do we go? Well, your options are actually very limited here because it's so built up. There's nothing around in terms of fields or areas that are suitable. I mean, you have to be when you are flying an aircraft, you have to be very selfless. So it's, you know, I know this sounds quite morbid, but if you're going to crash, do your best to just kill yourself and nobody else. Like, okay, do your best to not kill yourself as well, but if you're in a situation where you have to ditch the aircraft and there is a chance you will die over, you know, let's say a 50-50 chance of you plowing into a road but then killing 300 other people because there's cars on it, you know, you take the one that favors just you dying. And that's something that always spooks me now. Every time I fly, I'm always looking out the window for, okay, if my engine goes now, like, where the hell do I go? And this is one of the areas that is actually very, very difficult to deal with. So we came up with a solution, and it's actually, and this was for the time of day, so it was a low tide, and that was the sandbanks. The sandbanks where the tide is low, you have lots of sand, and to be fair, if you did it properly, if you did a proper job, you wouldn't flip it. But that was really the only place. I mean, if you actually look out the window, there isn't really anywhere to go. I mean, this scenery doesn't quite denote like the forestry, so you can't put it into perspective how many trees there actually are when you're flying out over here. Like, all of this looks green, but it's not. It's just covered in trees. So yeah, the only real suitable thing would be to plant it down on one of these sandbanks, and then at least, you know, pray no one's walking their dog on the sandbank or something, but at least then you would be out of everybody's way. But this area now is towards Seaforth, and at this point we are basically outside of controlled airspace. We can't climb above. I think it goes up to like 2,500 feet here. There is a step up higher, but we never went any further than 1,500. And what we actually did was we turned left and we flew over sort of West Kirby and then down towards the Rill coastline, which is what we'll do now. Now, I'm not going to take you all the way down to Rill, because that is a video that I'm pretty sure will bore you. But what I will do is I'll take you over there for a little bit, and then we'll kind of do a bit of steep turns and then turn back. And honestly, this is as good as it gets as in terms of excitability. But the thing is, if you don't do the basics, then how are you supposed to be good at, you know, the overall experience? I would imagine it's pretty rare for a pilot, even a student pilot, to not be able to maneuver an aircraft in the sky. Landing, taking off, okay, maybe taking off's not so difficult, but landing, I get it, like that takes a bit of practice. But flying in the sky just around in circles is no big deal. But if you don't do it properly, then I suppose that's where the problems begin, or when the problems can begin. So, and by the way, if I've missed any sort of checklist related things, the chances are we've just not gone through it yet, because at the end of the day, you know, I am flying with an instructor, so they have overall responsibility of the aircraft, and if I'm too busy doing something else, or you know, there's a myriad of things that could cause us to miss something out. There are sort of flows to go through when you're climbing, cruising, descending. So, for example, a flow of the climb, it's not a checklist, it's just a flow, is to make sure that the fuel pump is turned off at above 1,000 feet, make sure that your mixture is basically where you need it to be, but only if you're above 3,000 feet according to the Piper specifications, and then of course you just trim for whatever power. And cruise is the same. 22 to 2600 RPM is what they're comfortable with you cruising at. And the only other thing that you really need to care about is the fuel selector. So right now, we took off with it on the left-hand side. You can see it down here. And if we look, the right-hand side has a little bit more fuel in than the left, but not sufficient enough for really anybody to care about. But we can switch it to the right, just to kind of show that we understand that that's what needs to happen. And that's it. I mean, you could turn the landing light off. That's something I've heard them speak about, is getting rid of the landing light. Some people seem to do it. Some people keep it on. I guess it's all to do with preference and maybe saving battery lives, or not battery life, sorry, bulb life. So, I reckon we can make a right-hand turn and head back towards Liverpool. Now, if I had track IR, I'd be able to actually check if there was anything in the way. I know there isn't. And the idea is, when you make a turn, is to make sure that this ball here, this black ball, stays in the middle. And the way to do that is just with a bit of rudder. So use the aileron and then sort of When you go into the turn, just watch it and just see what you need. Like right now, I'm not using any rudder and the ball is fine, but that's because it's not really a steep turn. But if we were to bank it over a little bit more, you'd probably see that the ball, it's going to call me a liar now, see, it's starting to slip a little bit there. And then you can fix that just by using a bit of rudder. And you see in that turn, we lost about 100 feet, which is not uncommon. I think even the instrument pass rating is a 50 feet difference. So if you can lose 50 feet either side, or gain 50 or lose 50 either side with an instrument rating, pretty sure the leniency for a VFR is like maybe even 200 feet. I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that. I'm sure someone will let me know. But anyway, as we were heading back, which is basically where we are right now, we weren't in touch with anybody. Well, we were actually tuned to Liverpool radar, but we weren't actually talking to them. And the idea was it's just to stay outside the control zone, just so we don't infringe anybody. And the plan is to route, or the plan was to route via a place called Kirby, which is just a little bit inland, and then land on runway 27. Now there's a motorway, which you can just see it just ahead of us right there with that bridge. That is essentially where we aimed for, and that keeps us well within range of being able to join to Kirby, but it also keeps us outside the controlled airspace. And at this point we did call them, and we said, you know, we're inbound. Again, if I ever get a chance to record the ATC audio, then you can listen to me make a mess of my transmissions. Pretty funny. But yeah, essentially we got told to report, so we were cleared to enter the Liverpool control zone via Kirby, not above 1,500 feet, VFR, and we were told to report overhead Kirby, which is as straightforward of a zone entry clearance as you will get, really. And as far as where is Kirby, well, it's really easy to see in real life because it's quite built up. But one thing I did notice is that in real life it's very white. I guess there's a lot of industrial buildings. So I would say that this area here is probably Kirby, right there. It's south of the motorway, so the motorway is here and it's south, and then this is the M62, I think. No, it's not the M62. The M62 is a bit further south. There's 3 staggered motorways. A lot easier in real life, I can tell you that. So we just continue in this direction. I'm just going to quickly check on my Sky Demon that what I'm saying is right, because yeah, okay, so that motorway, yeah, this makes sense. Okay, now I understand what I wanted to say. This motorway up here, the one that goes to the northeast, this is the M58. Then there is the motorway, which is the M57, which comes south off the M58. And then if you carry on going a little bit further south, you will find this not a motorway. This is an A road, the A580. And where the A580 meets the M57 is basically Kirby. So this entire area here is Kirby. So what actually happened to us is we were flying towards it, and we reported approaching the overhead of Kirby, and then they said, okay, from there we need to route to a place called Tarbuk. Don't hold me to the name of that. Now I know where that is. It's just a place that I don't associate with anything, but it's essentially the set of ring roads where not the set of ring roads, but it's just basically a roundabout where the M62 meets the M57. Lots of M's. If you're not from the UK, it's going to confuse you so much. But I'll show you. It'll make sense. It's really easy to spot because there's an S. This S here is pretty iconic. You know you're heading in the right direction if you can spot this S, and then you just kind of fly towards it. So This is this is basically where we were. We're about here, and then we turned right. And at this point, the wind really started to nail us. To be fair, my instructor, he didn't care. He was just like, you know, if you want to fly it, you fly it, and he let me do it all. But I was wrestling. Like, I'm pretty sure, he didn't say anything, but I'm pretty sure there was an element of over-controlling because I just felt like I couldn't keep it straight. But maybe, you know, that it was a really windy day, so maybe that's what it was all about. So as we're heading down this this road here, the M57, you will soon see another motorway cross left to right. And that is, that's the M62, and on that you'll see a roundabout or a set of intersections, and that is exactly where Tarbuck Interchange or Island or whatever they call it is. I'm actually going to search Tarbuck. Yeah, it's called Tarbuck. That's it. That's exactly what it's called. I thought it was called like a double-barreled name, but it's not. Okay, so everything is going well. And at this point, it's funny because there was a guy in the porter cabin just before I left was prepping his Tomahawk. He was just doing a local flight. And I'm pretty sure I heard him on the radio at this point, but something interesting happened. So if you actually looked at our 12 o'clock now, this roundabout here, this is, wait, is it? Oh no, it's a bit further down, sorry. This roundabout here, right here, with the motorway crossing, that's Tarbuck. So that's where our clearance was limited. We're still on Liverpool approach here. So they basically turn around to you and say, report Kirby, and then they say route to Tarbuck and report Tarbuck, and then at Tarbuck they change you to Tower. Now we're approaching Tarbuck and we'd had no further clearance limit, and that's a big nope in the UK. If you only get sent to somewhere and you have no onward clearance, then you don't go any further. So we get, about this point, we get transferred to Tower. And my instructor, I guess, experience is on his side at this point, just says to me, do me a favor, just hold overhead Tarbuck because it's busy. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So I fly towards Tarbuck, and there, again, he's right. It gets, the frequency is just saturated. There was a couple of IFR heavies, or not heavies, but jets inbound. There was maybe 3 or 4 people in the circuit just doing whatever they were doing. And then there was a guy joining from the north, and also with us as well, and there was a guy joining from the south too. So we were in a left-hand orbit over here for quite some time, for about 10 minutes, I mean, something along those lines. If you go on Flight Radar 24, actually, you can look back at the replay of where we went. And actually, you know what? I'll leave the link. I'll leave the link to the report so you can actually see what we did, and then you can kind of understand what I'm getting at. But we orbited around here for maybe 10-15 minutes, and I'm not going to do an orbit because there's nothing around. But the next clearance limit for us was to route towards something called the Jaguar, and we were asked to report visual with another PA28, or maybe it was a Tomahawk, I can't remember, that was on a similar routing and joining for a right base for runway 27. So me and my instructor, well, my instructor more than me, is frantically looking out the window trying to figure out where the hell this guy is. And then all of a sudden I see a plane about this sort of direction where my mouse is, heading straight towards us. And we both look at each other and simultaneously go, what the F? I can't swear on YouTube apparently. And we can only assume that what he's actually done is he's kind of flown towards the midfield, turned left, flown a sort of right-hand downwind, and realized he was too tight, so then tried to widen his circuit up a bit and just flown straight towards us. At that point, I literally just did this by instinct and sort of turned away from him, and we just positioned our base leg a little bit further along. So we actually ended up turning base almost over the river, which was pretty cool. So, anyway, at this point, we are essentially told to report final runway 27 behind the traffic, so this PA28's doing his own thing, or PA38, whatever it was. or is it 38, 34? Can't remember the type codes. And so we start to prepare for landing, and it's really quite simple in a plane like this. The first thing you do, obviously, drop the power. That's standard in any plane. So the power can come back to about 1500 RPM, give or take. You need to slow it to get just one notch of flap out for the moment, which is on this bit just below 100 knots, which we've already passed, so we can bring a notch of flap out. And then it's pitch for power, so you want to maintain sort of 85, 90-ish knots, give or take. And you can adjust the power then according to, you know, there's obviously wind and weight and everything else involved. And turn the landing light back on, that's a deal. Also fuel pump now, the annoying nose has to come back on. Make sure that your carb heat is selected to in. And we used it a few times in the flight. I've kind of forgot to cover that bit. Just when you're up in the sky, it's nice to just recycle it a couple of times just to get rid of any potential icing. And the fuel selector, well, it's still on the tank from before, and that's that. So, all we're doing now is looking for a point to start the turn to final, and in the meantime we've started descending. If you look at the altitude, we're gradually descending through about 750 feet at the moment. We will turn the aircraft onto final. There we go. Now it might look like you're a bit high, but at the end of the day, the PAPI lights in VFR scenarios, as far as I'm told, and I could be wrong, is just a guidance, right? And we're a very small plane on a very big runway, so it's no big deal. So now we can just bring all the flaps in, and we can continue to fly to just down to the runway. Interestingly, things that you don't realize in real life, when there is a lot of trees or you're near land that is close to the sea, the lower you get, the more chance you have of sort of air just penetrating you from beneath. And this is what happens about this point. It doesn't really simulate an X-plane, but you get to a point where there's a forest area actually in real life, all the way, basically this entire area, and yeah, it hits you hard, but it was okay. Nothing that you can't really deal with. So, coming over the numbers, speed is good, and this is a bit that everyone gets wrong. So you can just idle the power and then just basically let the aircraft do its thing. It will eventually touch down. You just hold it, and there we go. Beautiful. Make sure you keep it straight with the rudder. That tire noise is just X-plane being X-plane. There's nothing you can really do about that. As soon as you can, once you've slowed down enough, just come back to 1000 RPM. So you've got a bit of power to taxi off. And then we're going right here onto taxiway Foxtrot. And then we will taxi back. So, first things first, get rid of that dodgy fuel pump. We can turn the transponder off now, we don't need it, or standby. Bring the flaps in. And we are essentially heading back to where we came from. Could technically turn the strobe off now if you wanted to be pedantic. You've left the runway, so you don't need it on. And I mean, at the end of the day, I would at this point, I mean, I know there's a lot of textbooks and manuals and whatever else you want to call them that tell you to do things a certain way. They're not rules, they're more like guidelines. Just respect your instructor. That's, I mean, unless they're doing something atrociously, like, obviously incorrect, then sure, question it with somebody. But at the time, just, you know, just respect them and let them. They're doing a job that they've been certified for a reason. There's I see a lot of people on these like PPL walkthroughs that tend to you know, say, oh, my instructor told me to do this and do this and do this, and he's wrong and she's wrong and whatever. I don't know, it just rubs me up the wrong way. If you want to do things your way after you've qualified, be my guest. It's on your head if something goes wrong. At that point, it's all on you. But until that point, just listen to the people that can give you the license. That's the way I look at it anyway. So, as we are coming back into the apron, we're basically taking it back over to the same place as before. There's a Cessna in the way. This is not how the aircraft are parked here in real life, but whatever, no big deal. And if you're lucky, there's actually a gap. They like to park it facing away from the porter cabin so that you can just jump in it and fly again. So they try their best to turn it around and face it in the opposite way, but to be honest, I've tried it twice and got it wrong twice, so... Right, there you go, that's about right. And then there we go. Parking brake set. So to turn the engine off, it's quite simple. Pull out the mix shut. And the avionics, again, are always on in my aircraft, so we don't really have the ability to turn them off, but whatever. Turn the mags off, you can turn all the lights off, everything else. Master switch is the last thing to go off, and you can unplug the headphones if you want at that point. And it's always a very sad point at this point when you have to open the door and get out of the aircraft after a flight. No one likes leaving the plane. But yeah, that's basically how my last exercise went. It was just sort of general handling, getting familiar with the aircraft. I've only got a couple of hours logged, as I said, so nothing too crazy. But if this is definitely something that I should keep doing, I'd love to know. And again, I will do my best to try and get the real-world content integrated into this somehow. But I don't know how many people enjoy GA versus, you know, the heavy stuff. I mean, if you just look at the statistics, I post a 787 video, within a day it's got 20k views. I post, for example, well, we'll see how well this does, but I bet you it won't even get half of that. It's not about the numbers, but at the same time, you know, you kind of want to get something out of what you produce. But anyway, we shall leave it at that. One take for me. I've actually just done this in one take without any... I haven't really had to stop. So I'm pretty impressed with that. Hope you enjoyed it. Always appreciate your suggestions and always thank you for your support. And until the next one, take care and ta-ra for now.